Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, just tell me. Uh, well, I'm hoping that today's talk is going to be at least as controversial as yesterday's, and as you can. Okay. Ok, like this. Allora mi siedo, fa niente. Ok, così va bene, no? Il volume, ok. Ecco. Also, okay. Third time, like they say. So, well, as has been already highlighted, next year's topic is going to be on human enhancement, and I won't be talking about that until next year, hopefully. But what I would like to uh, tell you is that among various versions of human enhancement in the literature at the moment, then there is one specific ramification that has been addressed by Sandberg and Savulescu, that are some well-known scholars from Oxford in the UK, and they've identified a specific ramification of the applications that enhancing biotechnologies could have on human beings. And that is the emotional response that the interaction with others might entail. And among emotions more broadly, which I define as emotional enhancement, this kind of enhancement, they discussed love quite extensively. And what emotional enhancement has as a peculiarity is that differently from other forms of enhancement, more is not necessarily better. But what I share with the enhancement more broadly is that the importance is the overall well-being of a single individual. So although not consequentially per se, they say, although consequentialists per se, they claim not to be obsessed with numbers. So each single individual is important in his own entity. Now, as you can see, there are many different ways. Some of you from Rome might know, but there are different ways of loving and expressing love. And in this particular instance, we will be focusing on romantic love, that is between two partners. Love drugs, which have nothing to do in this particular case with Viagra or things like that, but have to do very much with the ideal version of love that we might have in mind. Point out that biochemical substances such as dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and their levels in our brain are strongly associated with our love relationships. So obviously, ignoring this scientific discovery would be unwise, going back to one of the points that were raised yesterday. And in fact, recent studies show that although our emotions are not only chemical reactions, despite the fact that some neuroscientists claim that to be the case, our high-order conceptualization of love response, and it is shaped by also the presence or absence of these substances. So, trying to have a bit more of a practical idea of what I mean by these love drugs. It has been found in a recent study on voles that the administration of oxytocin can induce pair bonding. So, for example, in these experiments, the voles were injected directly in their brain with oxytocin, and that induced them to pair up, basically. But when, on the contrary, they were given oxytocin blockers, animals that were first inclined towards monogamy discarded their old mates and sought new sexual partners. Now, to my knowledge, in humans, this extremely intense experiment has not been made, so no one has been injected with oxytocin directly in their brain. But it's interesting to see that these products are available on internet. This is a nasal spray for synthetic oxytocin, and is actually prescribed at times by marriage counselors and doctors to enhance the relationship or somehow help it chemically. So it's not fully science fiction, at least. So we would say that love drugs are roughly divided into two kinds. The love-preserving drugs, useful to preserve a marriage for the sake of children, for example, and love-diminishing drugs, useful to help a person detaching themselves from an abusive partner, for instance, which unfortunately we all know is not science fiction either. And a yet not available combination of the two kinds, the authors claim, would be soon present ourselves with the possibility to redirect our love towards who we would so rationally choose. And so this group is referred in literature as love-enhancing drugs. But what are we enhancing exactly? So love drugs are supposed to enhance our freedom as they increase our capacity to overcome our biochemical predispositions, to follow our rationally chosen preferences. And of course, already that claim is open to question, as I imagine some of you would gather from some of the other presentations in the summer school. But on the other hand, instances of domestic violence are a perfect example of how this development in pharmacology could help individuals to live a better life. I mean, on average, I think everyone would agree that if he or she would know a friend or a relative that is suffering an abusive partner, the idea of having a pill that could help her or him to detach from this violent man or woman is tempting, at least. And of course, an equally important impact could be given to all these individuals suffering from unrequited love, rejection, or lost love, be it through time or just as life goes on. Now, this, I'll try to see whether this short clip it's watchable. It's just also I want. Okay, I think we'll skip the video. Anyway, it wasn't particularly referred to serotonin as a neurotransmitter. But what's important is, should we cure love? And here we go back to the whole issue that is moving this summer school about medicalization. So should we even conceptualize love as an illness in certain instances? So being melancholic or heartbroken often invoke some form of counseling and psychotherapy even. So why should we not allow the use of some drugs that could help us in the same and perhaps more efficient way? But how far should we go in preventing negative emotional experiences from occurring? After all, not only adversities shape our identity, but we also risk to medicalize a very intimate part of our lives. I'm sure by now you know this quote by heart, even though perhaps it was in Italian a couple of times I've seen it. But referring again to Conrad, to medicalize a condition implies an a priori idea that sees it possible to cure a condition. So, for example, even if not achievable at present, the will is to solve the problem eventually. So we do not yet have a cure for cancer or AIDS, for example, but we are nonetheless trying to find it with the conviction that it will eventually be within our reach. And again, the quotation from Conrad, medicalization describes a process by which non-medical problems become defined and treated as medical problems, usually in terms of illnesses and disorders. Medicalization per se is neither good nor bad, some scholars claim. And thus we should not be misguided in our conceptualization of the problems related to the implementation of all those new drugs targeting our emotions. And as a reply to the literature brought forward by Erb, Sandberg, and Savulescu, Alberto Giubilini from Oxford as well wrote, "This is what makes the medicalization of love different from other forms of enhancement. The medicalization of love is about medicalizing a whole aspect of human biology, almost ex novo." So, although we disagree on a number of issues with Alberto, certainly I agree with his definition, because enhancing love is very different from enhancing one's eyesight, strength, and cognitive capacities. Also because it involves a large risk of deception for third parties in ways that differ from those scenarios. So some issues that are raised by love-enhancing drugs are, well, the general human enhancement critique that we won't be looking at until next year again. So the flattening side of trying to make everyone equal, if you want. What I call the theological disenhancement, the unloved soldier issue, the useless inauthentic love, and the conversion therapy and discrimination. Those are some issues, and of course, you're more than welcome to criticize them by the end of the session and point out other thoughts that you might have in mind. So, okay, let's start with a controversial one. So we are, or sadly, are aware that there are cases of pedophilia among all religious creeds, and this is an issue for parents, for example. So ensuring by some version of these love drugs a sort of sexual neutrality of those priests, say that in a Catholic church, or rabbis, or imams, or whatever you might have in mind. Anyway, a religious entity that is representing school X, ensuring their sexual neutrality, in a sense, would certainly push parents to trust the institution more. But there are two issues, I think, and many more, of course, but I'd just like to point out those. So the first one would be that a major reason behind the choice of a parent to send their children to a school that follows a certain belief is that the representatives of this creed have a specific vocation. They represent a particular segment of society that has a value in itself, nothing related to the chemical aspects. So even if in practical terms, say, it could guarantee the use of these drugs could guarantee an increase. Here I've referred to a Catholic school, but could apply to other Christian contexts in which there is a restriction in terms of sexual activity of the priest involved. This could, in practical terms, even be advantageous. In other words, if a school would decide to implement those drugs at a large scale, it would make parents from other creeds inclined to sign up their children in that school, possibly even eventually having conversion within their families, because they are guaranteed by the chemical reaction that those drugs have on the priest in the given school. Non si capisce? Well, okay, well, so moving on to the second point, I'll be happy to, if there is anything that is unclear, I'll be happy to talk in Italian afterwards. Just it wouldn't make sense to switch. Okay, so this is perhaps a bit complicated also for the translator to follow without having read the papers before, so it's my fault, I guess. But anyway, sticking to some theological issues. So not only, again, referring to the Catholic context, one would imagine that, and we have some representatives here, they have, spiritually speaking, they have a specific role. And I would imagine that knowing that they are reacting, in this particular instance, it can be to love, but in other ways, through chemistry, in the way that they do, I think it would undermine the spiritual value that we grant them. And that's, I think, a big issue. And somehow related, what would other creeds, so for example, in Judaism, when there is no absolute sexual restriction, namely a rabbi could be married or could be sexually active, yet what would they do? Would they have to target themselves to their colleagues and at a certain time, I don't know, after 40 or after 50, sexually neutralize themselves so to ensure that parents in other creeds will trust them as much as colleagues in this particular context, the Catholic would? I think that's rather problematic. Unloved soldiers. Now, depriving soldiers of the option of romantic engagements would structurally change the way in which soldier X, say, will perceive and interact with the world. So could we really claim that such a choice would be free and voluntary? Something happening with the translation? Okay. So in line with the dynamics of increasing number of non-citizens serving in the US military, it is not difficult to suppose that those individuals more easily inclined to succumb to the temptation of giving up love in order to become better soldiers and gain money or prestige in society will come from less advantaged societal groups. So we could dismiss the socioeconomic discrimination argument by stretching the point further and claim effective drugs would guarantee an ideal level of security for the civilian population. But this imbalanced transaction between security of civilians and freedom, the freedom to love for some individual in society, but not others, such as soldiers, could be justified on some grounds, Hobbes, for example, for those of you familiar with a little bit of political philosophy. But this conflict should be actively acknowledged and examined. And even then, to consider such a case as only the free choice of an individual soldier would be to ignore important aspects of such a choice. Michael Auskeller from Exeter University points out that we could get rid of love altogether were we to find alternative ways to ensure the same or higher level of individual well-being. Why talking about love at all? And what we can get from another individual is quantified in its practical benefits that could be replaced by technological advancements. And this brings in another interesting topic in bioethics that I'll limit myself to a slide here. But it is not surprising that many of the advocates of human enhancement, and if you like, also emotional enhancement, are pushing more and more towards science fiction fantasies that are becoming gradually more close to reality, such as, for example, sex boats. Not only last week, I think I've seen 3 major newspapers like The Guardian and others talking about this, where this idea of enhancing our experiences is, first of all, is extremely related to our individual well-being. So even the results of having this enhanced experience should ensure us longer life, more pleasure, and so forth. Leaving aside all the other aspects related to love as such, namely interacting with another human being. So what we can get from another individual is quantifying its practical benefits that, again, could be replaced by technological advancements, such as sex robots. So maybe it's not love anymore. And here, this is another example I'd like you to think for a second. So say Jim, a blue-eyed white Englishman, rationally decides to take some love-enhancing drugs that will make him more attracted to black women because he wants to actively ensure that society becomes less racist. So he wants to, even if he's moved by good intentions. So soon after the beginning of his treatment, Jim meets Asantewa, I hope to pronounce it correctly, a charming Ghanaian, and they quickly fall in love. Would he still be in love with her if he stopped taking the drugs? And if he did, we should wonder why he needed the drugs in the first place. And if he didn't, we would have to accept the artificiality of the term love in this instance. So, for what concerns the practical implications of changing oneself so to fit better their true identity, caution should abound. Focusing only on biochemical ways to change what we do not like about ourselves might do more harm than good. Christina Gupta addresses the potential problems for sexual minorities in terms of risk to achieve non-progressive ends. For example, a homosexual male might be pressed by his conservative family to redirect his sexuality towards an heterosexual partner. This will skip because the video is, but anyway, this was one direct witness of this attempted conversion therapy that obviously were not successful in this case. And in relation to the implementation of love drugs in conversion therapy, Arp et al. Suggests that instead of focusing the discussion on gay rights, making the decision of what is tolerable, moral, and so forth related to a group of individuals, we should switch it to individual rights, allowing anyone to freely build themselves. Now, this would be necessary to achieve the crucial individual well-being praised by the same supporters, not only of emotional enhancement, but human enhancement more broadly. But would it be morally acceptable to allow a racist to select the exclusive ethnic group to which she will feel attracted by? So think of the example that I just gave you and reverse it. Say that someone would chemically enhance themselves to ensure that they will be racist. I think we would generally all agree that that's not really tolerable, let alone is not really a version of love. And yet, if you really want to ensure that every single individual human being is able to freely build themselves, maybe that's an option that could arise, and we should think about that. So even if perhaps not directly enforced by the state, the outcome seems very much in line with other eugenic programs of the past, because it's very likely that people will be peer pressured by the majority in many instances. So it is important to consider that also a forcibly variegated, progressive society would lose the value of its richness if this would result from a peer pressure scheme. Again, going back to the example before. And more important still, even in this more open-minded scenario, the result would end up highlighting the value of love drugs at a societal level, not at the individual one as instead portrayed. So if we would all be using, like Jim, moved by good intention, we would be using these drugs to ensure that society becomes less racist. Still, we would do it for the sake of all society, for a vision of society that we want to have, namely a non-racist one. That's beautiful, yet has nothing to do with the individual choice that each one of us would make freely. Rather, it's a societal political scheme that we would follow. So that's why I think that instead of talking of a medicalization of love, we should be talking about a mechanization of love. So it was mentioned in a number of the talks, this role of pharmaceutics. And so Arp et al. Acknowledged the pharmaceuticalization of love as a more drug-related definition. Yet the suggested way of portraying medicalization flattens not only our way of intending love, but also our way of defining who is to be labeled healthy. Because let's not forget that in all this process of the medicalization of love, there is an important dimension of somehow referring to love as an illness, as something to be cured, as we said. And I think here it's interesting to see, to look at the definition of health provided by the World Health Organization in 1948 to understand that there is more than one layer attached to medicalization. And this was mentioned in the very beginning by Professor Miranda. So that is the physical, the psychological, and social. In a recent article published by Casado da Rocha, he points out this triadic approach distinguishes between disease, the condition as considered by the medical profession, illness, the condition from the subjective experience of the patient, and sickness, the condition from the perspective of society's institutions. Now, in Arp et al.'s characterization of medicalization, there is no relevance given to the WHO three-dimensional approach. But if we accept the WHO accounts of health as valid, talking about a phenomenon of mechanization of love in which the disease and sickness conditions are fused appears more accurate in the present scenario than talking about a complete medicalization of love in which the subjective experience, the illness condition, should be present and instead is absent. It restores a kind of love that is external to the subject, but that is defined by doctors and society as objectively valuable. And this version of love obscures the profound link that the subject's inner self has with the emotion. Love is a kind of relationship and experience in life that implicitly requires suffering. I think we should not forget that. So choosing to render love a one-way experience based only on the needs and desires of one of the two partners would reduce the unique feature of one's life into only an individual experience. And that's Jürgen Habermas referred to somehow, not directly. So to convincingly defend such a change, to amount to an improvement of our well-being, would be seen consistent only if we would define it as something completely separated from our lovers. Again, I think that mechanization could help us understand how the conceptualization of love relationships derives from a larger political scheme that could directly be linked to the Industrial Revolution. So the proposed emotional revolution, alongside the wider enhancing one, appears to be exposed to the same risk of Industrial Revolution, having at its justificatory center productivity rather than humanity. John Harris, a renowned transhumanist, posthumanist supporter of the human enhancement ideology, in defending the improvements of technology enhancement, wrote this rather extensive quote, which I won't be reading, in which basically says, well, before fires, candles, and so forth, most people went to sleep in the dark, and then once we had candles, we were, yes, pushed to work more, sometimes work during the night, and yet at the same time we were able to cope with this revolution and guarantee more rights and so forth. I think that we should question ourselves as to what end are we trying to reach here. Is it to be more productive that we need to restrict our law? Perhaps. So the parallel between the two occurred and proposed revolutions links well with another reason for choosing to use the term mechanization. While medicalization implies a subaltern role of emotions to medicine, mechanization questions more in depth the legitimacy of such a prioritization of what is to be valued in one's life. So to sum up, we must be very careful in implementing drugs that will promise us to take charge over our love, as there can be various problems with it. It was the, I'm sure, rather controversial theological disenhancement issue, the unloved soldier, which I think should be equally controversial, the useless, inauthentic love issue, and of course the conversion therapy and discrimination. Instead of a medicalization of love, we could be talking about a mechanization of love, as this term helps us point out two important aspects not sufficiently stressed in the debate until now. First, through the use of the WHO classification of health, we could defend the definition of medicalization of love proposed by Herb et al. Does not sufficiently take into account the illness condition in the equation. And second, as with the Industrial Revolution, mechanization has brought humanity additional freedom in some spheres of our lives, but it also carried new constraints with it. We might still defend such a change to amount to an improvement of our well-being, nonetheless, but only as something fully separated from our lovers, and not as individual-oriented as portrayed. Such a scenario does not appear to enhance any love, though perhaps some social stability and productivity. Thank you. Any questions, doubts?
Would you be so kind to go back to the definition by Casado da Rocha?
Sure. I think we're nearly there. There.
Just wanted to catch the difference.
Okay, so disease, the condition is considered by the medical profession. So a doctor is able to tell you, you have the disease of love. The illness is the condition from the subjective experience. I feel really ill, I'm in love. And the sickness is the condition of the perspective of society's institutions. So this man should be granted free access to the Mensa because he has fallen in love and, you know, is suffering like hell. So these, of course, are very easy schemes, but that's the idea. And it seems to me that the illness condition, which obviously plays an important role in the scheme, I mean, he writes it, but it's, you know, it takes over the World Health Organization. And again, Professor Miranda also himself referred to these three levels. Is something to take into account, especially for such a personal experience in our life. Love is, I think, as personal as it can get, supposedly.
As far as the unloved soldier.
Yes.
Okay, so what I understood you were saying is it's like depriving these soldiers from feeling any sense of love so that they can serve their country better.
Yes.
Okay, so it's like a flattening of those emotions if
Yes.
you give them certain drugs and that.
I mean, let me clarify. I'm not saying that such schemes are in place at the moment.
At
but
the moment.
At the moment, but it's not that unthinkable,
Exactly.
right? So if we have oxytocin blockers
Yes.
that prevent you from falling in love, I mean, you might be very like to be more efficient in certain jobs. It doesn't necessarily have to be, even if you're, I don't know, if you're the Swiss guard guarding the Pope, maybe you are even more efficient, okay? But I think it should be acknowledged, which at this stage, it should be acknowledged as a worry for some segments of society.
Exactly. That's my concern is that from all the ones you were saying, it looks like, they just want to, it looks like, and I agree, I think we are heading in that direction. And one of the ways is, the use of sex bots.
Yeah.
And I have been noticing that from that movie Avatar to just the increase in using, robots, really.
Yeah,
And
no,
are we
it's,
heading in that direction? And it's good that you brought this up because, I am seeing that too. And the fact of the biochemical, like for example, one of the things when I counsel young girls to try to avoid premarital sex is when they have their first encounter, oxytocin is being released, and that's why when they break up with the boyfriend, the one that's more devastated is the girl versus the guy because of the bonding that occurs with the release of that oxytocin. And so just seeing the fact of maybe doing these, injectables or whatever in the future, how they can just really affect, can be just a whole flat people with no emotion.
yeah, or too many times, but thank you.
Enhancing love is more like so instead of enhancing love is not like suppressing all the biochemical things. I don't know how to word this.
Sorry, I can't hear you so well.
Enhancing love,
Yeah.
in reality, we are suppressing all the biochemical functions. So you are not really enhancing, but you are suppressing, isn't it? It's like enhancing like a psychological type of issue. Because you are enhancing something, but you are suppressing in biochemical terms the natural response to emotions.
Well, yeah. So that's why there were two types, right? So one is so say for example the married couple that they actually they love each other in a way, but they I don't know, they don't feel passion, or they see that in some sense they are struggling to stay together, and they generally want to preserve their marriage. They believe in marriage as as something holy. They want to do it for their children for whatever reason that might be the case. So in a sense, there you chemically enhance their chemistry, if you allow me this horrible play on words. On the other hand, say in the case of abusive partners, now that's a diminishment. So it might be called love enhancing drugs just because you need to have one definition that encompasses all of them. But yes, in that case, it would certainly be diminishing. Now, the interesting, I mean, I should stress that the literature that Arp and Sandberg and Sabulescu has brought forward, I think, is fascinating. I mean, I just disagree with some positions, but it's something very important to take into account, because if as it is happening through neuroscientific studies, we are discovering more and more of how our brain works. I think it's important to discuss it upfront rather than allow just a few to have the knowledge of how this is shaping our way of consumption, among other things, but even approaching medicine. So, for example, the abusive partner, there you have this diminishment, and having the possibility of combining the two. So being able to really direct your emotional response to, those individuals that you have so chosen, it's scary in many respects, I think. The gentleman? Yes.
It was one question. It's going together like what made us
Sorry, can you raise that voice a little bit? Because I don't know, is this working? Yeah. Thank you.
Last time the batteries were not working yesterday, unless you changed the battery since yesterday, it wasn't working. Oh, now it's working.
Wonderful.
Yeah, what we said about the medicalization of love, following the example, the explanation that we give, I can say that the medicalization of love is not really love.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is like misusing the word love. If you want to say about, maybe you can give it another name. Because if you take the two that we gave him at the end about the medicalization of love and the mechanization of love,
yes.
You follow really that the medicalization of love is not really love.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I think that's a very good point, in a sense that, to define love has been, a rather complicated thing to do for millennia in different cultures, but certainly something that in one way or another, pretty much all historical periods or continents or religious backgrounds refer to in one way or another. Of course, the one that we have in mind is often related to Romanticism. So in the last 3-4 centuries has really, 2 or 3 centuries have, pushed forward this idea that we might have. But yes, this version that we are referring to is this. You're absolutely right. I did not. I think I skipped a slide or forgot to put it, but the definition that we should have had in mind throughout our, throughout my presentation is that the definition that is used is this combination of attraction, attachment, and lust. This is the definition that has been brought forward by Professor Fisher. And she has started this trend of analyzing love in these terms. And romantic love, so these 3 components are present in different ways and have different reactions, but somehow represent what we mean by romantic love. So of course there is, as I said, attraction, attachment, and lust. And they all go together, and depending on the chemical phase that we might be living, one of the 2 might be more strong. Okay. So, for example, going back to sorry, thank you. This is crucial. I apologize for having forgotten. This is very important because, for example, in the case of the married couple, of course, there is, the attachment might still be there, but maybe the attraction or lust is lowering. So that's how you might be playing with these 3 components. So thank you very much. Maybe
il mio intervento forse si ricollega anche a quello che è stato detto ultimamente nell'ultimo intervento. Infatti io pensavo che forse più che meccanizzazione dell'amore si possa parlare di meccanizzazione della funzione sessuale, perché almeno per quello che è la mia opinione, quando si parla di amore non si può non considerare il fatto che per esserci amore ci deve essere libertà. Cioè io posso amare perché sono libero anche di non amare. Invece qua c'è una visione dell'amore meccanicistica, come se fosse solo unicamente una questione chimica. Che poi, quindi sarei anche interessato a capire qual è la visione antropologica che c'è dietro tutto ciò. Perché io sono convinto che se noi, oltre a meccanizzare l'amore, meccanizziamo anche l'uomo, e questo tanti lo fanno, sostanzialmente andremo a distruggere l'uomo, perché distruggeremmo la persona. Quindi la domanda forse che che visione antropologica c'è e se quindi si può parlare di amore con una visione antropologica totalmente meccanicistica o se non è più coerente e intellettualmente onesto parlare di pulsione sessuale di un essere che è già predeterminato e che in realtà quello che fa non può non farlo e tutto il resto. Cioè, se è questa la domanda, la visione antropologica che c'è dietro questo.
Allora, diciamo innanzitutto che, appunto, facendo riferimento a quest'ultimo chiarimento, spero possa essere di sostegno in qualche modo, non so se è solamente una fusione sessuale, nel senso che, per esempio, l'attachment va al di là, non è semplicemente cioè il lust teoricamente, lust sarebbe la passione, credo, no? Sì, comunque è uno dei 7 peccati capitali, quindi quello che sia l'altro, non ricordo, peccato, ma comunque. Lì forse si tratta specificamente della dimensione sessuale. L'attachment invece, appunto, facendo riferimento anche a situazioni di matrimoni, quindi estensione anche temporale dell'attaccamento al partner, già hanno a che fare con il sesso, semplicemente con la dimensione sessuale, diciamo. Il fatto di avere al centro di questo schema non solo la meccanizzazione dell'amore, ma bensì dell'individuo, sono assolutamente d'accordo. Diciamo questo in maniera un po' limitata in questo caso, però ho cercato di fare riferimento proprio a una meccanizzazione dell'essere umano finalizzata a cosa? Alla produzione? Parlavo anche prima con il professore. Questo va oltre, ci sono varie forme, torno a dire, non voglio, diciamo, addentrarmi troppo nella sfera dei potenziatori, perché se ne tratterà comunque anche il prossimo anno, però in vari atenei si sa che vengono utilizzati questi potenziatori cognitivi con una frequenza spaventosa. Si parla di numeri, il 70% degli studenti di laurea ad Harvard fa uso comune di Ritalin, Adderall, per che cosa? Per essere in grado di stare all'altezza dei colleghi e colleghe e produrre dei risultati all'altezza. Però questo può tranquillamente finire per danneggiare e la società e l'individuo specifico. E chiaramente questo si può ripresentare anche nelle interazioni sociali, perché chiaramente anche la concettualizzazione dell'amore in questi termini può finire per incidere sulla nostra maniera di interagire con altri esseri umani, anche non necessariamente in termini di amore, di relazione, ma semplicemente gentilezza, piuttosto che tutto diventa funzionale alla produttività. Chiaramente è una visione un po' distopica quella che sto forzando, però secondo me non andrebbe scartata in maniera troppo rapida, ecco.
Quello che chiedevo, ma io non metto in dubbio che comunque ci sia anche magari possono anche essere utili questi strumenti. No, volevo sapere se c'è, che visione dell'uomo c'è a livello filosofico, cioè se l'uomo è realmente libero o se è semplicemente una macchina che va in automatico. Perché per esempio si parla anche, no, si parla anche di, è un po' fuori tema, però per capire.
Penso tanto un po' di tempo ce n'è,
per considerare persona un computer, non se ne parla, è chiaro che è perché già si considera l'uomo come una macchina, chiaramente, no? Perché altrimenti non sarebbe possibile. Ecco, siccome sentendo questo intervento ho ripensato a questo, vorrei sapere quanto di questa visione antropologica c'è in tutto ciò.
Ok, allora cercando di essere, spero, più in grado di rispondere allora, sicuramente è interessante notare che già si è passati, invece del computer, per quando si parla del cervello, perché qui ovviamente le neuroscienze hanno più e più un ruolo centrale, ok? Quindi se uno guarda anche nella storia, quando si cominciarono a mappare, cioè diciamo a riportare le prime mappe geografiche del mondo, si parlava del cervello come una mappa, quindi anche il cranio veniva studiato in questi termini. Poi è arrivato il computer, si parlava del cervello come computer, e adesso si parla molto di rete, i neuroni, i neurotrasmettitori che abbiamo, e quindi c'è il rischio che l'uomo sia solo quello, finisca per essere letto come, in questo caso, un tipo di macchina prevedibile, famosi esperimenti di Libet sul libero arbitrio, esiste il libero arbitrio, siamo in grado ormai, e lì c'è molta speculazione. E chiaramente c'è una parte della domanda che è stata posta, sicuramente fa riferimento a questo. Ora, in termini sia io, ma anche comunque, non credo che neghino la libertà dell'individuo. La cosa interessante secondo me da sottolineare è che tipo di libertà effettivamente abbiamo, perché incentrare il tutto sulla libertà individuale, che però in alcune situazioni viene limitata per una serie di circostanze, è questionabile. Da lì dicevo questo riferimento a programmi passati di eugenetica, che anche se non imposti dall'alto in questo caso, possono comunque spingere le persone a appiattirsi e a seguire comunque un trend questionabile. E poi, in termini proprio pratici, uno potrebbe dire, perfetto, come del resto fanno, se permettiamo alla coppia, per fare riferimento sempre a questi esempi, permettiamo alla coppia di andare da come si chiama? Un psicologo di coppia, non so esattamente qual è il termine in italiano, lo permettiamo perché non possono prendere delle pasticche invece al contrario, funziona uguale. Uno potrebbe dire, beh, la differenza è che io posso entrare con la mia compagna o una donna può entrare con il proprio compagno o come volete, insomma, combinazione che volete, però a metà dell'appuntamento posso decidere di andarmene perché, non so, mi tengo particolarmente offeso. Invece prendendo la famosa pastiglia, durante quel lasso di tempo la mia libertà assoluta viene limitata. Chiaro, questo accade in varie situazioni, uno potrebbe anche dire allora però se vieni alterato da sostanze quali lo champagne, che normalmente si accompagna, almeno nel contesto giudaico-cristiano, si accompagna a un contesto molto romantico, anche lì però viene alterata e di conseguenza la libertà per certi versi viene meno. Quindi non è così nettamente.
Forse c'è un problema con la dignità, cioè, quando io mi autocondiziono così pesantemente, non c'è un problema per la mia dignità di essere che si autodetermina.
Beh, non lo so, questa è una domanda abbastanza... Sì. Beh, sicuramente si può... Io sono assolutamente favorevole a... Cioè, più si discute meglio. Non so se ci sono altre domande. Vedo una, poi andiamo lì.
The implication is that human suffering is basically an illness that needs to be cured. What do you think? How do you think this will be dealt with in terms of like people dealing with death and then that leading on to seeking cures via memory erosion and things like that? Do you like what are you thinking about those things?
No stress.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I understood. So, well, can you hear me? Yeah. So, well, again, not moving too much outside the field. I think obviously there is a strong reference to the human enhancement ideology more broadly, okay? So for example, when I mentioned the sex votes, for instance, there is all the advantages that type of extremely mechanized version of sexual activity would produce on the single individual at many levels. So multiple orgasms will guarantee more longevity, and so forth, which of course shows how connected all these debates are, because longevity is another main theme of humanity. You know, actually there is Audrey de Grey, for example, that talks about death as an illness. So the idea is to eventually being able to erase death. Of course, the overpopulation and another number of aspects are often, put aside. Those are evidences of how these are interconnected. And again, I think certainly there is a tempting side by everyone that is wishing the best for the next fellow human being to reduce suffering. But at the same time, we all know that some of the suffering that we went through in our own lives have allowed us to then not only be stronger, but just enjoy life more. So some deprivation are functional to appreciating more life as it is. So this, I think that germs with kids is a good example. There are some instances in mostly in Western countries where this absence of germs have reduced the resistance of children to even minimal diseases. I'm not talking about vaccines. I'm just talking about, say, flu and so forth. So sometimes this obsession with wanting to prevent is not healthy. Just to use, I think, an appropriate term. Does that answer any?
Yeah, sorry, it was very well the question.
That's fine. So I think there was, yeah. No, sorry. I think there was this lady first.
Yeah, I foresee another problem that we are facing. I know in the United States, and I know here in Italy, they're also facing, and that's a sense of responsibility and sense of loyalty and love. And a lot of this can go back to the mentality of addiction and getting into overuse of this. This opens a door for people to say, well, I'm sorry, I was not faithful to you. It was the lack of serotonin. It was, I have no loyalty to my country, therefore or to my community, therefore I can go and kill all those that I hate. And we're facing a lot of these kinds of things, and I'm not condemning what you're saying, because you're saying some very important things, and you brought up a lot of very important drawbacks in this situation. And I think that this is something that we need to look at more carefully in terms of whether or not we accept these kinds of things within our society. The parameters that we open for the lack of responsibility and the lack of loyalty that we're seeing, this can accelerate to even more lack of responsibility and more lack of loyalty and concern for other people. And that's what I foresee as difficulty with this advancing of medicalization and mechanization.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think yes, responsibility is an important word, which I believe was completely absent from here, and yet does have relevance, and of course connected also with a number of the mostly that question. Yes, it is convenient in certain instances, the idea that I can blame, well, you know, that's used to be, it's my DNA, it wasn't me, no? There was this renowned joke, so to speak. And now it's, you know, it's my brain, it's written in my brain, and I can't help it. Which, again, don't take me wrong, there are aspects that one has to take into account, and if there are studies that show certain important and valuable results, it would be unwise not to take that into account. And yet, we should elaborate because, as we all know, there is also a way of reading facts. So that's easy to be politicized. And so being responsible, if you like, is what we should do, I think. So thank you. There was one.
Sì, ok. Io ho 70 anni, ok? Quindi io tutte queste cose proprio mi lasciano interdetta in una maniera terribile. Ho come la sensazione che si stia parlando della classica perdita d'acqua, per cui si tampona questa perdita d'acqua senza andare all'origine, dov'è che il tubo è rotto, perché mi sembra che ci si stia allontanando sempre di più dall'aspetto spirituale dell'essere umano. Cioè, a me piacerebbe di più sentire che magari c'è una pillola che aiuta a fare il dialogo con la propria moglie o con il proprio marito, cioè aumentare il proprio senso di coscienza, di introspezione. Cioè, io non voglio fare la polemica, però vista da una persona che è vissuta in un'altra epoca, però non mi sembra che sia un discorso poco moderno, mi sembra un discorso deleterio tutto questo, che adesso se per il soldato che così magari se soffre meno rende di più, cioè ci stiamo allontanando completamente dalla parte spirituale dell'essere umano. Questa è la mia sensazione da 70 anni.
No, sicuri. Ma per curiosità, quindi lei per esempio sarebbe favorevole a una pillola di una sorta di dialogo artificiale?
No, era in modo polemico.
Ok. No, immaginavo.
Però penso di non aver cioè non penso che devo sbagliare molto, perché tutto ciò che sento, di cui lei è ritirato tutto ciò che sto sentendo, il parametro è che si sta allontanando l'essere umano da se stesso, cioè perché il dolore senz'altro, anch'io ho sofferto per amore, e anche abbastanza perché era un'altra epoca, ero piena di complessi eccetera eccetera, però insomma ho affrontato eccetera, forse gli unici casi in cui appunto uno deve elaborare un lutto, forse in questo caso, però ci sono gli aiuti, c'è il dialogo, e poi siamo fatti per maturare, si matura solo soffrendo, parlando con noi stessi.
Chiaramente poi ci sono delle situazioni dove magari c'è chi, per esempio, per elaborare un lutto magari è da solo, non ha la struttura, per esempio, non so, in Italia mediamente noi comunque abbiamo dato valore alla famiglia, quindi si tende tendenzialmente ad avere magari appoggi vari, però in altri contesti, contesti anche sociali intendo, è meno comune, piuttosto che poi lì chiaramente finisce per essere un po' come dice lei, una situazione figlia dei tempi, in altre parole il dover correre sempre di più, magari rincorrere un lavoro piuttosto finisce magari per far spostare un qualcuno geograficamente e rendere più difficile la continuazione delle interazioni sociali standard, se vogliamo, che poi vengono meno in momenti dove c'è uno stress emotivo importante. Chiaramente, perché a me personalmente nel leggere la loro letteratura il caso dell'abuso domestico è quello dove io personalmente sarei più tentato di dire sì, se ci fosse questa pillola che finalmente le fa capire, perché nella maggior parte dei casi sono donne che soffrono uomini violenti, prende questa pillola e finalmente è in grado di mandarla a quel paese e distaccarsene emotivamente, prima ancora che fisicamente, tendenzialmente sarei favorevole. Il problema è che spesso vengono utilizzate queste situazioni per poi aprire la porta all'utilizzo, però se viene utilizzato lì, perché allora non in questa... E quindi uno deve...
Guardi che è pericolosissimo, perché con questo sistema allora eliminiamo i bambini che nascono più forti, perché tanto sono destinati a soffrire, cioè diventa una voragine.
Sì, beh, no, quello è un po' diverso comunque. Grazie.
Okay. Going back to your point about removing somebody from a domestic abuse situation,
Yeah.
what are the arguments that are for and against doing so chemically, outside of the obvious, like we need to get her out by all means necessary? But what are the arguments that are saying, no, we shouldn't use this pill for that situation?
Well, I mean, kind of going back to what I just said, one could use the famous slippery slope argument. So the moment that you allow the use of this biotechnology in that instance, how do you legislate? So in a very practical, bioethics tends to deal in, quasi-realistic scenario often. So the pill is not there yet. But in practical terms, the pharmaceutical company that will produce that pill, how will you be able to foresee the misuse? I mean, think of Adderall and Ritalin. They are supposed to help, and of course, that's open to question. We have seen it in some of the presentation, ADHD, this over-labeling of children especially, and this use. But assuming that there is, and there is a chunk of the population that do need these pills, they are often misused. People, there is a black market on internet among students of guaranteeing these for a completely different purpose. So is it that unthinkable that I might say, for the same reasoning, I want to excel in order to guarantee myself a good position or a good grade. So I in the beginning of the semester, I said to myself, well, you know what? I want to ensure that I won't fall in love this semester because I really want to be focused. There, I take this pill regularly every morning. I mean, I'm not really hurting anyone but myself, supposedly, but it's problematic. And on the other hand, of course, the argument is in this particular instance is easier. Is, well, if you're willing to allow a friend to take you out for a drink and intoxicate yourself, to talk it over on how badly your relationship is, with your partner, and that is socially acceptable, then why not taking the pill that will just erase the problem altogether and allow you to set yourself free?
So outside the slippery slope argument, there really aren't any?
Well, I mean, there could be many, obviously. I mean, one could just say we should not alter ourselves chemically, full stop. But, where do you draw the line? And there are some positions, even some faiths don't they don't use aspirin. So, for example, if you would take it from there, you would just not allow it because it's certainly more invasive, if you like, in the way that you interact with the world than others. On the other hand, for example, there have been some studies just recently on how psychedelic drugs could have medical benefits. Of course, that's open to question again, as I was saying to the gentleman, how will we interpret such results? But how psychedelic drugs might have an effect in medicine. And if you link it to some traditions, say Native Americans, for example, or others that have ascribed medical potential to certain plants or so forth, culturally speaking, could re-give them value of their traditions. But that's a very broad and very interesting way of looking at the things, but in short terms, I don't think it would be used you know, within the literature.
Ultima domanda?
Quello che volevo dire è che a mio avviso c'è il rischio, o meglio, occorrerebbe secondo me differenziare quello che è l'essere in grado di amare e quello che è l'essere in grado di manifestare le emozioni che si legano all'amore. Altrimenti si corre il rischio di ridurre attorno a quanto si diceva prima, no? Se si controlla non è amore, e mi trovo d'accordo con questa affermazione. Mi è capitato l'altro giorno di parlare con un amico che diceva: mia moglie mi rimprovera per il fatto di essere anaffettivo. Io credo che si possa controllare appunto l'emotività e tutto quello che è la manifestazione degli stati emotivi dell'amore, ma che l'amore di per sé non sia un sentimento, cioè non è un qualcosa che si controlla. Allora mi veniva in mente, ad esempio, parlando di serotonina, insomma delle sostanze che abbiamo, che sono le stesse che, se non sbaglio, vengono utilizzate anche per curare gli stati d'ansia e di depressione. Allora pensavo che comunque all'amore dei figli, che secondo me è l'amore che più si avvicina forse all'amore inteso in senso divino, ma non credo che una persona, perché assume sostanze magari per curare uno stato d'ansia e di depressione, per questo trovi meno amore verso i figli, cioè sicuramente è il suo grado di manifestazione, quindi il grado di manifestare queste emozioni proprio a livello emotivo cala, però l'amore in sé, a mio avviso, no. Allora, secondo me il rischio è di confondere un pochino quello che è proprio l'amore con quelle che sono con quelle che possono essere le sue manifestazioni emotive, che cambiano anche a livello soggettivo, secondo me, proprio da persona a persona.
Diciamo sicuramente, ecco, anche il sottolineare altre versioni. Io, come dicevo, appunto, ho fatto riferimento a l'amore romantico in questo specifico caso, ma chiaramente c'è l'amore verso i figli. Io non ne ho, però immagino. È assolutamente importante. Matthew Liao della New York University ha scritto proprio su, diciamo, il dovere, anche lui un po' rifacendosi a questa idea dell'utilizzo di Love Enhancing Drugs, il dover garantire un certo livello di amore verso i propri figli. E anche se da una parte, torniamo sempre al solito discorso, da una parte può essere sicuramente interessante immaginare un mondo dove tutti i genitori garantiscano un certo livello di amore ai propri figli, che poi tra l'altro finiranno per essere membri della società dopo una generazione o due e renderanno la società più bella. Dall'altro però mi veniva da pensare, torno a dire, non da genitore, però avendo anche amici che hanno adesso bambini piccoli, può capitare che magari nel lasso di tempo dove il genitore ha preso questa pillola per garantire la sua maggiore benevolenza verso i bambini, magari il bambino o la bambina finisce per fare qualche cosa che è rischioso per lei o per lui, dovrebbe essere redarguito, non dico picchiato, assolutamente no, però redarguito in maniera netta, in maniera che possa formare anche appunto il bambino o la bambina negli anni a venire. Magari invece il genitore è alterato chimicamente, e lì c'è da chiedersi, tornare anche al discorso della libertà, cioè quanto siamo predisposti a poter alterare anche i nostri giudizi e la nostra interazione col mondo per poi seguire questa idea di amore ideale che abbiamo razionalizzato antecedentemente. Non lo so, anche questo è molto interessante e aperto alla discussione, e credo anche lì bisognerebbe ponderare bene, perché chiaramente in questo caso poi gli effetti sulla società tutta sembrano ancora più evidenti, perché parliamo di nuove generazioni. Comunque, grazie.
Benissimo, grazie. Grazie. Allora, come abbiamo